Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Hero History. My name is Reed,
I'm Patrick.
I'm Shadwick.
and today we're doing the Fantastic Four. It's a little unorthodox considering we've been mainly focusing on single heroes, but when we thought about the Fantastic Four with the trailer being released recently and the movies coming up, we just couldn't really think of doing The Thing, the Human Torch, the Invisible Woman, or Mr. Fantastic by themselves.
And plus, it really fits since there's three of us.
Yeah.
Yes, 3.
So, let's do the Fantastic Four. Let's talk FF. So, their origin is way back in the 60s. There's when they were made by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, supposedly. It's always kind of iffy how much credit he actually had. But they were a team that flew up into space to test
Reach the stars.
Yeah, to test this experimental ship, and were hit by, I think, a solar flare back then. Some sort of like wave of energy that like shut off all the systems in the spacecraft and sent it hurling down to Earth, where it crash landed, and they emerged mutated suddenly. Mr. Fantastic, basically his body became like rubber or plastic, and he could extend himself, mold his body like that. The Invisible Woman could turn invisible.
And project force fields.
Johnny Storm, her brother, just ignited in flame, becoming the Human Torch. And Ben Grimm, Reed Richards' like best friend from college, essentially, became the Thing. His body encased in this stone-like material that was essentially his skin. It could not be peeled off. There is no Ben Grimm, human underneath. That is his body now.
And it gave him some super body issues that he had to deal with.
Yeah.
Well, he's just literally stone all over. There's no real human features left out of him looking sort of humanoid. But he has super strength from that now. He's incredibly durable. And he likes to clobber things, as his catchphrase is "clobber in time."
Yeah.
And so that was the start of the Fantastic Four. And they were very much the first modern superhero family. Eventually, Reed Richards was in a relationship with Sue Storm, and they had this kind of, mom-dad dynamic eventually when they get married. Johnny Storm is the youngest of them, who's very rambunctious and very immature and always playing around and, likes to fly off on fire and sort of he's careless, carefree, reckless in a way.
Always getting denied those bank loans.
So
It's kind of like an early The Walking Dead, too, with Victor Von Doom and his, love triangle or wanting it, right?
Walking Dead?
Yeah.
like with the governor?
No, with Rick and...
Oh.
Rick and Shane, and okay.
Yeah,
right?
Can,
I can sort of see
I haven't
that.
read or watched much of that, so...
Oh, you've seen an episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Before going further, actually, we should preface more with incredible spoilers ahead, more than normal for the other couple
The
episodes.
spoilers are so good.
There's going to be a lot of spoilers for a lot of Fantastic Four books and movies and stuff, more so than the other shows.
And
So
for
at
The
least
Walking
want to
Dead.
let you guys know. Apparently for The Walking Dead.
There's a love triangle.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see how you can kind of make that connection, but Doom, who does come in, who is Reed Richards' rival back all the way from college, and there isn't a love triangle for long. That rivalry has always existed, but eventually when he becomes Doom, it's really just more about power and conquest and messing with the Fantastic Four as a whole, and proving that he is smarter and more intelligent than Reed Richards, and more inventive, more capable, just all around better. But yeah, so those are kind of the main characters. You have the Fantastic Four, and you have Doom, who is the main villain, and who's one of the most famous villains in all of Marvel. I mean, a lot of people who don't know much about the Fantastic Four still know about Doom, right? And that's because he is just such a malevolent figure who is constantly seeking power and trying to sort of become the like superior being of the human race. And so much so that he goes off and founds his own country, Latveria, right?
Yep.
Um,
The world's a mess, and he just needs to rule it.
Yeah.
And he also, Darth Vader's design was partially influenced by Doctor Doom, even.
Oh,
So
wow.
really, really deep cultural impact, pop culture.
Yeah. And so the Fantastic Four always, from its inception, has focused around this family-oriented theme. They, as much as there are other teams in comics like the X-Men, who are more, like, sort of like they're runaways, right? And it's
Yeah, like an
like an
orphanage.
orphanage. And you have the Avengers, which is a team, but that's there's no real like intimate connection between all of the Avengers for the most part. I mean, like, I'm sure there's probably like love relationships throughout their history, but there's never been something that is so like connected to family ties, right?
Right.
And so it's a very like it was a very interesting comic back then, and it's very interesting to look at because of its inception during the 50s, 60s. Sue Storm is very much like housewife depiction back then. It's pretty bad early on, and she really could just like only turn invisible, and she eventually got the power to like also create force fields. But right, she was always this like protective mother character who
Yeah.
never really. She was never doing anything incredibly offensive. She was always just sort of like
Says something
cooking
too.
for the family and protecting them and shielding them and taking care of her brother and that kind of stuff.
Says something too that they made basically like an invisible housewife character as opposed to everybody else who has like super
Yeah,
show-offy
Yeah.
things.
Reed
But in
Richards,
the,
who is like the team captain, the main member, is like the smartest guy.
Who has the lamest power? I mean,
Well,
stretchy people always get made fun of. I think it's with fairly good reason.
Yeah,
If you want elasticity, you go for Spider-Man and the web shooter.
Yeah, I
Well-
understand. His power is a little bit just silly.
I think it's mostly his use of power, to be honest. Like,
Yeah.
he's just he has such a, for the smartest guy, he has such a uncreative style of fighting. And the reason I bring this up is because I'm a huge One Piece fan.
Oh yes.
Well, a lot of this the uncreativity that a lot of people associate with the Fantastic Four is really just because of sort of most people really only know the Fantastic Four in their like 60s, 70s incarnation, like that Golden Age incarnation. No one really knows like a lot of what's been done with the Fantastic Four because Marvel writers did realize like these were lame characters. Like they were very interesting, right? There's a very interesting dynamic there that isn't explored, but they do get lame, right? Like,
Thank God.
okay, like,
I was thinking it the whole time.
okay, I know. It's a common thing, but like, the Thing is like a lesser version of the Hulk, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Fantastic can stretch his body, and so everyone just makes jokes about stretching
Yeah.
his member and that kind of stuff. And Invisible Woman really just was like going invisible, making force fields. Human Torch is still kind of cool, right? He's
Human Torch almost sticks out in a good way because at least when I was a kid, he was the only one I ever considered like, oh, he could be his own, independent superhero who's like doing his own thing, side by side with like, Iron Man, Spider-Man, all that stuff.
he's really like the only mainstream Marvel hero that really played with fire. Like,
Well,
yes, there are plenty of other like fire people out there, villains, some minor heroes.
usually
but,
villains, yeah.
yeah.
Well, and Wonder Woman, I thought she had a awesome power with like the force field ability, and like invisibility was just sort of a perk or whatever. But like,
Wonder Woman.
Yeah. But anyway, so back to Wonder Woman. But no, they always had her like especially in the cartoons, like she would just always be like, "Oh, I'm so weak. I used my force fields too much," and then she would lose her power, and like that was never an issue with the Human Torch. And so a lot of that's in depiction, but in the 80s they did make Invisible Woman a lot more powerful.
Yeah,
so.
throughout their career, they got a lot more powerful.
Yeah.
But before we move on and you hear all like the current stuff that really makes them cool, I think it's sort of important to talk about. Well, if they really weren't that cool, right? Why did they stick around? How did they last 50 years, right? Why did people want to pick them back up? And it has to do a lot with the theme of the Fantastic Four's stories and like a lot of their adventures. The Fantastic Four were one of the first like superhero comics to start exploring like science fiction comics of like the 30s and 40s and like those themes. Like they really got into like space and science and like a lot of like really technical stuff that hadn't really been explored in a lot of other comics. A lot of other comics are, you know, like superheroes just kind of blowing stuff up and like, you know, having fun and chaos.
Yeah,
But-
like it's like even when you were talking about, you know, their starting experiment going up into space, like now the new trailer, not to jump too far ahead, but it's talking about interdimensional travel and stuff.
Yep.
Like,
And that stuff like all originated back in the 60s and 70s. Like having Reed Richards be this like smartest man on earth really allowed them to play around with a lot of science experiments. And you see the Fantastic Four like going to outer space in like their ships and like collecting research data, and
Yeah.
they have encounters with galactic like heroes and villains like the Silver Surfer and Galactus. They are like the primary team that, you know, encounters Galactus quite a bit, despite, you know, he's you know, one of the most powerful supervillains in all of Marvel, and yet this team that probably isn't regarded as like the coolest or most powerful team sees him a lot because they deal with space and exploration a lot, and they have like really cool villains even on Earth. Like the biggest thing would be the Inhumans, is that they dealt with this other group of people called the Inhumans. If you've heard of Black Bolt or Medusa, the Inhumans are from Fantastic Four, and that's for people who follow the movie arc. They're making an Inhumans movie, and a lot of people don't really know like what are the Inhumans.
Right. And then
So-
they've been they're a primary, maybe secondary, but I mean one of the main characters on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is actually an Inhuman, and so they're really sort of backdoor piloting the whole Inhumans, like
Yeah.
even film franchise through Marvel Television at the moment. So
Because
that's
they're
pretty
having to kind of avoid
Yeah.
their
copyright.
origins because Fox owns Fantastic Four rather than Marvel. But I think that's fine because I think eventually the Inhumans move on to really being their own thing. Like Black Bolt's just super cool, and
Yeah.
Medusa's cool. Medusa actually is a Fantastic Four member for a while in some incarnation of the series. But I think that's maybe we could do like a whole other episode on them. But yeah, they have really cool villains, and I mean they have a couple lame ones. Like they've got like Mole Man and stuff too. But they have like the Wizard, I think, is a hero or something similar. Or he's like a sorcerer, right? I'm just tasting on the name. But like they deal in like demons and like evil magic and stuff as well. And there's just like a lot of this like mystical, like magical fiction and like science fiction, and just their whole world was just so much more interesting than them. But like it didn't matter because they're still a fun family to follow, and
Right.
like you learn lessons from them, and you were getting something in comics you weren't getting anywhere else either.
Right. So they were created in part as a response to the Justice League, which was more or less the first mainstream superhero ensemble, and so they, in my opinion, what differentiated them from the Justice League was the family dynamic. And so there was that, and there was also the fact that they were completely public with their secret identities. I mean, we're talking about 4 individuals who are not that different from mutants from X-Men, and X-Men have the whole like subjugated angle, and yet the Fantastic Four in the comics are just like praised. And it's just a really strange dynamic, and it actually reminds me a lot of what made Iron Man so popular ever since 2008 with Robert Downey Jr. is that line, "I am Iron Man," and he's just like, fuck it, and he just goes public with the identity, and that's not something he does in the comics. And I think that's a huge part for his popularity. I'm always hearing comparisons between Batman and Iron Man, arguably 2 of the most non-Spider-Man popular superheroes out there. And, Batman's the one who maintains his identity and he's grimdark, and Iron Man is the one who's public with his identity and he's fun, but, they're both geniuses, more or less. But with the Fantastic Four, I think that, honestly, it was a huge factor that they didn't have that whole secret identity angst, because I feel like, speculating, of course, that a lot of readers are wondering, like, well, why couldn't you make this work? It's like, I'm going to be a celebrity with these
And
powers.
they were totally public.
So,
They
yeah.
live in the Baxter Building, and that's
Yeah.
their home. And like everyone knows the Fantastic Four lives in the Baxter Building, and they run a business. Like Reed Richards is like the CEO of like their corporation, right? And they sell the technology that he develops, and like they also just run an industry out of the Baxter Building, and it's this like, all right, we're here, but we don't care because it's important for us to like share ourselves with humanity and do what we can to help them like advance, humanity with like the knowledge I have and the research we do. And so yeah, like a lot of times when they're like out in space like collecting data, it's to like better the human race, and like Reed Richards is like always out to do that.
That's super crazy because like what you said, the X-Men, they're in the same universe, and
Yeah.
so much of what the X-Men are have, Reed Richards and Dr. Xavier, they're so similar, and like they're both geniuses, and Xavier could arguably have a larger wealth of knowledge, and, as well as even Victor Von Doom and Magneto. Like they basically have the same powers, right?
I mean, Von Doom doesn't have any powers, right?
No.
He just
Really?
has like crazy genius and technology.
Yeah,
So-
he's basically on this almost close to the same intellectual as Reed Richards. Reed Richards is touted as literally being the most intelligent human being on Earth.
So I just outed
And-
myself a little bit because my only knowledge is the movie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Doctor Doom is always mad that he believes himself to be the most intelligent person on Earth, and like that's why he's always like at battle with Reed Richards to show that he is smarter than Reed Richards. But yeah, he has no powers in several incarnations. I think throughout the timeline there might have been periods where he would get like superpower or
Okay.
something. But for the most part, it's that he is hyper intelligent and rich and like basically becomes sort of an evil Iron Man in a way. Like he's got this suit and it's got beams and powers, and he controls like a robot army, and he is in a little bit like an evil dictator Iron Man, but he's like even far smarter than Tony Stark, who is still a genius, right? It's really that only like Reed Richards and like Doctor Doom can like be at this level. That's sort of always been their battle of like the smartest human beings on the planet, right?
Is he public with his evil identity, or
Oh yeah, I mean like well
that's his actual name?
well I mean like
Victor Von
no,
Doom.
yeah, Victor Von Doom, and he is Doom, right? That's always been his thing. Is he like hail Doom is the thing, because he's so public. He like Doom just owns his own country and has his own government, and like is part of like a lot of the heroes are actually like in trouble, like because you can't step foot into like Latveria without like breaking foreign law, and like they have an embassy, and like he's so smart that this isn't just like it's his evil lair, it's this actual country he's developed.
It's his evil country.
Yeah, yeah, and so he gets away with a lot of stuff because it's sort of this allusion to Russia in a lot of ways. Like there's a reason it's in Eastern Europe, and it's got this whole like sort of dictator feel to it, where it's operating outside like normal UN law, but like doesn't care because it is its own country and can do this, right? It's this like Cold War allusion to that too. But yeah, he's this just force of evil sometimes, but sometimes not. Sometimes it's just superiority, and Doom has to help sometimes the rest of because they need help, and he has this like mighty country behind him with all of his technology and all his force, and sometimes they have to go to Doom and be like, well, we're not fighting right now, so could you kind of help us out because the whole Earth is in danger, right? And that comes into play in like several arcs. Sometimes they have to team up with Doom,
Which
because
is just great.
yeah.
And anytime Galactus shows up,
Yeah. So, and that sort of brings us to the modern Fantastic Four, and what you've been waiting for is when do they stop being lame, right? When
when does this whole thing happen?
Alright. So that is Jonathan Hickman's FF, and that is close to the most recent writing on the FF, behind the recent arc
Movie
that
update.
just finished. So the Fantastic Four actually recently got canceled. They have stopped writing Fantastic Four comics. With
for the first time
Oh,
ever, right? Like,
I don't know if the first time ever,
Okay.
but it is definitely major that they're doing it.
That's
And
a political move to get Fox to stop, right?
it is
probably.
partially a political move, like because Marvel still makes money off of that, but also like people weren't reading the Fantastic Four. There'd still have to be like a little bit more of a reason than just to piss off Fox to do
Right.
it, because it is one of their mainstay series. But yes, some of it is partially strategic and partially just to spite Fox is to like stop making Fantastic Four comics. And they also stopped like adding new characters and all this kind of stuff.
Right, because then those concepts would go to another company essentially. So.
But I mean, both companies do a lot to spite each other, even beyond the Fantastic Four. So, like, there's a lot of stuff. But yeah, so that recently ended. The Fantastic Four concluded on like issue, I don't know, like 550. I don't remember this. It could be like 680, like something in the hundreds issue. Like they've concluded the Fantastic Four on it. It's done being written for now. But that run wasn't particularly popular, so there was also a reason to sort of the readership had gone down. Mainly after Hickman's run, which is touted as being the best run on the Fantastic Four ever. And we'll get to why that is, but I think first let's just explain how the Fantastic Four are brought into the modern era, right? And a lot of that was we have to make these characters kind of cooler because eventually the readership wasn't continuing with just space adventures and just these characters. They had to be modernized, right? So as much as like the campiness of the Golden Age was fun and Thing always going like it's clobbering time and like constantly like Johnny Storm picking on the Thing, right? That stuff kind of had to get a little bit serious. It had to kind of grow. And so you have things where like you start to figure out like, okay, they do have more powers. Invisible Woman gains the ability to create her barriers like anywhere, and she starts to have like psychokinetic powers where she can put a barrier around your brain and crush your brain.
It's a little too powerful, don't you think?
Well, like, I mean, yes, but like
I guess she's a good guy.
She's
so
supposed
she
to
would
be a
never
superhero
do
that's supposed to be
something.
powerful, and like for a character that was just like sitting in the kitchen sort of like for like half of the 60s, for lack of a better phrase, but it's sort of still accurate. It was nice to finally see like a recognition of, okay, no, they're going to make her an appropriate character, and like, yes, she can create force fields and barriers inside people's heads and like start actually being powerful with like some kind of psychokinesis, right? And Mr. Fantastic, if he wanted, could stretch his body so thin as to like shoot his finger into your brain and stab it, right? And
the worst way to die. Death by a fantastic finger.
Yeah. But Mr. Fantastic was still the one here that like he was still stretchy, and that's a hard way to make serious. But how they started to show him being more powerful was starting to truly give examples of his intellect and like what he was able to create, and explain that like the human race was like 50 or 100 years ahead of what it would be at had Reed Richards not existed, right? I know they basically started kind of really giving credit to his knowledge and understanding, like, yes, he's got this superpower, but maybe that's, as for all these people, maybe that's not his superpower in a way. Like it is a superpower, but it's really his mind. Johnny Storm would occasionally like got a little bit more serious, and they started to like recognize that he could like burn as hot as a supernova and stuff like that if he wanted to.
The atmosphere. If he wasn't careful. Yeah.
And the Thing was sort of the hardest one to do, right? Because he didn't just start like growing new powers out of it. He's still just a brick block, but they at least started to like show off some of his like crazier moments of strength a little bit more often. Like there were moments back in the 60s where like he would like lift a building and stuff and like create like sort of a seismic quake in a way. But they started to like at least show that he's kind of up there with the Hulk, and not in the same regard because he can control himself, but at least that he is comparable to a lot of the other super strength heroes in that universe, right? Because at this point there's the Hulk, there's Luke Cage, there's Colossus, there's dozens of super strength characters. So a lot of the big thing was showing that off a little bit more, but also giving the Thing some emotion and making him more relatable, because that's the struggle with the Hulk too, is that like it's always difficult to make the Hulk relatable. Well, at least with the Thing, he wasn't just rage filled. Like the Thing is still emotional and like really suffers as being a person because he can't sort of go back to his normal life, but in all regards he still thinks like a human and acts like one, but he can't live a normal life.
So by that token, would some of the most interesting story arcs be less action driven then?
For the Thing, yes, a lot of it was like when it got down to, he missed being able to traditionally love his partner he was with prior to turning in this and being with her. And there's sort of this interesting dynamic from his character is that like this, I can't remember this woman's name, but she still kind of loved him, but like it was more about the Thing not letting himself be loved, and like the story of I'm a monster, who could love me, and dealing with these sort of emotional issues. And that's when the Thing was a more appealing character, because he wasn't just yelling "it's clobbering time" and like making one-liners and like misogynist jokes and like that occasionally. So that was sort of bringing them into the modern age, and so bringing Reed Richards' high intellect and making him at least seem a little bit more powerful with his powers, making Invisible Woman an actually powerful character with a personality, bringing Johnny Storm into line of not always being like a reckless young idiot, and like realizing he is so powerful that he has consequences of not keeping himself in control, and bringing the Thing's emotions to in line with his super strength, dealing with super emotional issues, sort of brought the team into a brighter light, and made them all more appealing. And you bring back the Silver Surfer, because the space issue was just so interesting, right? It's just, how many other superheroes do you know that like regularly travel to space, right? There's not that many. There's like Captain Marvel does it today, and you have the Guardians of the Galaxy that are popular now, but it's just there's not that many, right? The X-Men are never flying into outer space often, right?
Fairly often, but
okay, fair enough.
Every other week.
But that's sort of what brought them back into light. And so within the last 2 decades, you have sort of 2 runs that really brought the Fantastic Four into a new light and made them shine. And the first one I'll talk about is Mark Waid's run on the Fantastic Four. And Mark Waid is a pretty famous writer now, and he's currently writing, Princess Leia, and he's had runs on like dozens of different Marvel heroes, and he's done all this kind of stuff. But he was what really modernized the Fantastic Four back in the early 2000s, where he sort of brought back sort of the fun of the Golden Age, and there was there's a little bit of a campy feel, and you sort of see their old personalities come in line with new personalities, and understand like how is the Fantastic Four growing and conforming to like the modern superhero age, right? And so you have a lot of the fun science fiction stuff. Like this first run has like an AI program that Reed Richards creates go AWOL and like and like become impersonate Reed Richards and stuff. And you get a lot of that, but you get a lot of new characters, and you start to really meet the children that Reed Richards and Sue Storm have. You have Franklin Richards and Valeria Richards, and they are also effectively mutants, because technically the Fantastic Four are considered like mutants as well as the X-Men, except they're more accepted maybe because of their
they weren't born that way.
They weren't born that way, and they also can hide it. Outside of like the Thing, who often does have to like dress in a trench coat and hat and like hide himself, like they all look human, and they can they're never really.
The Thing's disguise might bring more attention to himself than he'd intend nowadays.
But he's a celebrity, so it's all right. Whereas, with X-Men, it's just this. I don't know how well they've tackled this in the comics. I know House of M in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, dealt a lot with like what's the difference between say an X-Man and a Fantastic Four member, but. To me, I think a huge difference would be the fact that X-Men are like this natural course of evolution, and that freaks people out.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I mean, they were more or less, a lab accident.
Forced on them. Right?
Yeah. So
they're victims as opposed to monsters.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be that way.
Because being diseased isn't a victim, but there's a lot of stuff there. But yeah, so this is sort of what brought it back, and I enjoy this at least is that. It's not my favorite. I do prefer Hickman's stuff that I'll get into, but it certainly is a good modernization. And when Hickman's stuff is very wordy and scientific,
Sweet.
and that stuff is great. But if you're not into that, if you're not into like deep reading and like opening a dictionary, for your reading, and you still want to get into that Fantastic Four, this is probably where to go.
Okay.
Because it's still fun, and it's got a little bit of Golden Age camp, bringing and combining it, but you see them grow, and you see sort of the Fantastic Four develop as a family, as a team, and you get a lot of the themes that were presented. And it's a great run. It's very nice. This is where you start to see Invisible Woman start like actually having real powers that are scary, and you start to really see the family. Because Franklin Richards is actually really important to mention, because as a quick thing, Reed Richards and Sue Storm's son, Franklin Richards, is the most powerful figure in the Marvel universe, and the super mutant, essentially, like superhero.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of like a lot of the ridiculous stuff like Watcher and like the
Adam
All-Seeing
Warlock.
Eye and all this kind of stuff. Because Franklin Richards is a mutant, and his power is matter manipulation.
OP.
So like it's ridiculous, and there are a lot of comics and like stuff with Franklin Richards like where Sue and Reed have to really watch him as a kid, because with kids have creative imaginations and no restraint, right? And so like sometimes Franklin Richards would just be like having fun and thinking, and would spawn a living Tyrannosaurus Rex in downtown New York because he could do that, because he can just manipulate matter and do whatever he wants. So there's a lot of dynamic of a mother and father teaching their son to like control his powers and learning to deal with that, and accepting that it's sort of like there's this Peter Parker story, you have great responsibility. Well, imagine if Peter had his powers from birth, and Uncle Ben had been teaching him from birth the lessons that are sort of taught through that, and it's a lot of like a coming of age story. You see them raising their kid and teaching him that like you have this power, and you have to learn to control it, because you could like obliterate the entire earth in like a second.
Yeah.
And there are incidents of like Franklin Richards like being like captured and like manipulated and used for that kind of stuff. But that's kind of a fun dynamic in the family, and you can kind of see them like dealing with their kids in this, and that's the start of that. And then eventually Jonathan Hickman takes over, and so this is Jonathan Hickman's FF, and this actually precedes his run on the Fantastic Four. This is actually technically a separate series. I don't actually have the omnibus with me.
So this is more of a mini series leading into an ongoing series.
This was 4 volumes, so there's like 24. But before that, he did this enormous I think like hundreds of issues run on the Fantastic Four, and that's called the Fantastic Four.
Okay.
And it was this incredible, masterful run of the Fantastic Four where Jonathan Hickman just let his like science fiction mind run wild, and it was just some of the most intellectual, creative science fiction in comics ever done. And that's why it is hailed by many as the best Fantastic Four run, and just some of the best comics you could possibly get out there, because it's incredible. And luckily you can find it in like 2 huge omnibuses now that look like dictionaries practically in size, like old school dictionaries, but
Are they full color?
yeah, full
Okay,
color.
cool.
But they're incredible, and it's that is the epitome of the Fantastic Four. Is he understood everything that made them great? Is this family dynamic, the science fiction and space and technology, and developing like race relations, with like outer space people, and dealing with the Skrulls, and advancing humanity's technology, and like doing everything for the betterment of the human race, and all this kind of stuff. And it's incredible. It's fantastic. And so if you're really into like deep science fiction, go seek out those comics, because even if you're not a Fantastic Four fan, but you're a science fiction fan, you will love that. You will hopefully love that stuff, and it might actually make you a Fantastic Four fan. But then, so there was a big. What transitioned to Fantastic Four to FF is because he kept writing it, but he wanted to like change it up, and like he did this different series. And this is where the big spoiler is: Johnny Storm dies. Like a key member of the Fantastic Four dies, and beyond that, he says I want Spider-Man to replace me. I want Peter Parker to replace me because he sacrifices himself. He knows he's going to die, and he sacrifices himself to save them in the Earth or whatever. So Johnny Storm is dead, and he says, "I want Peter Parker," because they've become friends, and like there's lots of like Fantastic Four interact with all the other New York superheroes, right? And like they've had She-Hulk on the team, and they've had Luke Cage on the team, and like all this other stuff. So there's been like other Fantastic Four members, so they're very familiar. And so Spider-Man comes in and joins the FF, which they've become known as FF. Is they're like I think it's I don't know if it's Fantastic Federation,
Fantastic Four or Five.
the Future Foundation. That's right. Future Foundation is what they become. That's why it's FF. Is they develop this Future Foundation, and you get into this, and like all of these characters that they've met through the Fantastic Four run are like present, and you've got like Dragon Man, who is now like able to like control himself, and Civilized is like sort of like a butler babysitter figure, like living in the Baxter building, like taking care of a lot of the alien kids that are there. Like they've got the Warlock's like son living there, trying to like raise him to be good, even though he was like the son of a evil sorcerer and stuff. And they've got all these figures living there, and it's this comic about sort of everything the Fantastic Four have been a part of, and like looking at the implications of the Fantastic Four, and like what have they done in this universe, and like what have they affected, and it's a big look at that, because the arc really starts off with Reed Richards and Valeria Richards is like discovering that Reed Richards is going to like end the Earth in the future. Like there's basically these other dimensions, other dimensional Reed Richards are like coming together to like end the Earth dimension, and like because like the dimensions are colliding. And, you know, it's like it's stuff for like crazy science fiction stuff. Dimensions are colliding, realities are turning, all this kind of stuff. But basically, you know, she comes to like, Daddy, you know, we need Dr. Doom. We need to go to Doom. He's like, work with Doom? Are you serious? And he's like, what's going on? And she's like, just really want to tell him. And then like, little Valeria Richards goes and like talks to Doom, and he's like, okay, and like, what's
how many
going
Reed
on?
Richards do I get to kill? All right.
Yeah. Exactly. Like he's like, okay, he's like, sign me up. And then like, there's like a council of like super villains, like super intelligent people, like finally discussing with Reed Richards, like, you're going to end the world. And he's like, what? And it's like, well, you and other incarnations of you are going to end the Earth, kind of thing. And it's this like wonderful arc of the Fantastic Four realizing everything they have done, this culmination of who they are, and like their universe coming together to tell this tale. And so I think Hickman just did like, I don't know if anyone will ever really be able to top that. Obviously, you know, I don't know if Fantastic Four is going to be around in 100 years, 200 years. You never know. But I certainly think comics will survive. But I think they are like the best Fantastic Four comics out there. It's definitely some of the best Marvel comics ever written out there. So that's my selling point for that.
So where would one start now? Like, do you just jump into this because you get to have Spider-Man, or?
It really depends on how much you want to get into the Fantastic Four, right? Because that's like 4 volumes. This, I think, is 6 volumes, the Mark Waid run. But then the actual Fantastic Four Hickman is 2 omnibuses, like, I don't know, like over hundreds of issues, you know, so it's really long. And so you wouldn't just buy those in volumes, because you'd want to buy the omnibus. So and then if you really wanted to get into the like old Fantastic Four, this would be a good starting point, the Essential Fantastic Four 3, because this is, you know, they have their Essentials collection. I think there's like 4 volumes, but this starts to bring in like the Inhumans, Silver Surfer, you get some Doom, you get a lot of the Fantastic Four famous stuff like in this Essential Volume in 3. But honestly, if I were to say, if you were to go and read the Fantastic Four, just start reading Hickman's, even if it requires you picking up like an omnibus and presenting yourself with an enormous amount of content to first read. If you really want to get into them and you like heavy reading, go there. If you don't like the heavy reading, start with Mark Waid's. Reintroduce you to the reintroduce yourself to the Fantastic Four this way. You'll get the Golden Age camp feel. You'll get a lot of the old history with some new modern stuff. It's more fun and light, and you can certainly enjoy it that way. And you can still find these pretty easily, all like 6. And it also is, it's less reading than a whole like dictionary, because like the Hickman omnibuses are like thicker than this book.
Okay.
So there's 2 of them. So that's sort of where I would start, at least. If you love heavy science fiction, run to Hickman. If you just want the Fantastic Four characters and you don't want to boggle your mind with just like paragraphs of science fiction reality bending stuff, just start here, because you'll still get some of the light science fiction because it's the Fantastic Four, it's Reed Richards, but you won't have your mind explode possibly.
My only recommendation, honestly, those are probably more just stronger recommendations than I would actually make. But I did read a really fun miniseries from the 90s, might have been 97 or 98, and it's called Heroes Reborn. And Marvel was just going through a brief period of kind of what DC does every so often, of rebooting their continuity. And a lot of characters die, and it's actually really good and really intense. And I mean, spoilers, if you have any interest in reading this random recommendation I'm making, then don't listen to this next part. But literally everybody dies. And then Victor Von Doom is left in the wake of Galactus devouring the Earth, and he's just floating in space with a device he and Reed kind of collaborated to create. And it's like, yeah, it's good job, man. But you died too, so
okay.
But yeah, it's just Von Doom floating in space, and like the Thing is trying to use this device to like reverse Galactus's power cosmic, and it backfires because Galactus is too powerful, and the Thing turns back into Ben Grimm at the worst moment, and then one of Galactus's many heralds just kind of decapitates him. And, yeah, so but it's a really even just as a general Marvel fan, it's a really fun sort of alt universe miniseries. But Fantastic Four is like the main attraction there. So.
I have a limited knowledge, but I would highly recommend for anybody wanting to get into the Fantastic Four to check out The Incredibles, the movie. I think it's a pretty great portrayal.
Solid B+.
Yeah, clearly. But speaking of films that actually relate to the Fantastic Four, they did make 2 films several years ago. Fox made Fantastic Four and Fantastic Four 2. We would not advise you guys go watch them. They are not good representations of the comic book superheroes. Chris Evans is much better as Captain America than the Human Torch, and it's just not really a great job done there. So there are movies out there, but look more forward to the new movie, which does look kind of cool. And I'm actually super interested because the one character design that I'm sort of interested in is that the Thing isn't wearing pants, right?
So inappropriate.
And like I know it's so inappropriate, but it's just more interesting that like throughout like all of his comic, exception most of he is still wearing shorts, right? So. It's kind of an interesting step. It's like, okay, well,
cling to that humanity.
Let's just make him the full rock monster. No more, because it sort of just take a humanity away from it, right? He's not wearing clothes.
He's sexless essentially. Like we don't know for sure about the classic Thing, but
we know he's still Ben Grimm.
He's got girlfriends, but but we just
he's just full rock monster.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting if they do anything emotional with him, because if they're taking away that human element of showing he still has any humanity left, which I think is a lot of what him wearing shorts is, right? Because why does a rock monster need to wear shorts? Well, it's Ben Grimm still trying to be human, right? Human's dress. So if they're doing that, are they going to make this character just like a beast, a monster?
Or are they just not really considering that angle at all? Are they not even going to play to that? So it's a question of they can either do it potentially very well or just sort of overlook the whole thing. But I'm actually really glad that they decided to go with, based on the trailers, interdimensional travel, because originally the Fantastic Four were going to be traveling to Mars, and that's space experiment. And Stan Lee has a quote that basically it's like, well, for all we know, the Russians will have been there by the time we even publish this comic, so we'll just say they're going to the stars. And I think as far as trying to do a more grounded, realistic take on the Fantastic Four, interdimensional travel makes a lot of sense. So
all right, so if you want to get into the Fantastic Four and you don't want to read look forward to the movie in July. If you want to read it, go to Hickman. Or if you like science fiction-y, deep stuff, go to Wade. If you like Golden Age camp, it's modern Fantastic Four. If you like playing video games, you could even go find them in Marvel Ultimate Alliance.
Oh, yeah.
There's that fun there, and those aren't bad games. They're kind of decent representations of the characters.
And Lego Marvel Superheroes.
That too.
Much fun.
But yeah, sorry for kind of running late. I think we're a little over our usual time, but that was a lot of fun. I hope you guys are informed on the Fantastic Four. For Hero History, for EXM, I'm Reed.
I'm Patrick.
And I'm Shadwick.
You guys have a good night.
Change the name of our show to Fantastic Forum.
That would be good. Fantastic Forum. You just never shut the fuck up.
Fantastic Foreplay.